The bread roll hit the marble floor when Dominic slid the empty chair toward his pregnant wife and pointed at the ground beside it. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The dining room at the Hargrove estate held 30 people, a chandelier burning above them like a second sun, and a silence that arrived the moment his finger moved downward. "Kneel and greet her properly," he said. Not a request, a correction, the way a man corrects something that has already disappointed him. Camille was already seated to his right, her fingers resting at the pearls around her throat, straightening them the way someone straightens a crown. She smiled. Not at Renee. At the room. 30 pairs of eyes moved from Dominic to Renee and stayed there. Renee's hand moved to her belly first, a reflex, not a gesture. And then she lowered herself, slowly, without a word. The bread roll lay on the cold marble beside her, and nobody moved to pick it up, and the chandelier kept burning, indifferent and bright, the way expensive things always are. Inside her cardigan pocket, folded in thirds, was a document. The name, printed at the top of it, belonged to someone seated at this very table. No one knew she had it. No one knew what it meant. Not yet. Dominic lifted his wine glass and turned back to his guests as though something minor had been resolved. Camille touched his forearm, a slow, proprietary press of her fingers, and leaned toward the woman seated beside her to resume a conversation Renee's arrival had interrupted. The guests adjusted. Some looked at their plates. Some looked at Renee. One woman, seated near the far end of the table, set down her fork without eating. That woman was Eugenia Hargrove, Dominic's mother. She did not look at her son. She looked at Renee, and her face held the specific stillness of someone who has already made a decision and is simply waiting for the right moment to let it land. Renee rose after a moment and moved to the chair she had been assigned, far from Dominic, near the end of the table, beside a cousin she did not know well and a floral arrangement that blocked her view of the room's center. She sat. She placed her hands flat on the table. She did not look at her husband. What nobody at that table understood yet was that Renee had not come to that dinner to survive it. She had come because Eugenia had asked her to. And Eugenia had asked her to because this morning, before the guests arrived, and before Camille selected her seat, and before Dominic had his first drink of the day, Eugenia had knocked quietly on Renee's bedroom door and pressed a folded document into her hands without explanation. Just a look, the kind of look a woman gives when she has run out of time for anything but the truth. Renee had stood in that bedroom doorway and looked down at the paper in her hands. A small brass button had slipped from Eugenia's coat sleeve and fallen to the floor between them. Renee had picked it up. She had put it in her pocket beside the document. She had been holding it, on and off, for the 6 hours since. The marriage had not always looked like tonight, but it had always been moving toward tonight. 4 years of small rituals, she had told herself, meant nothing. Chairs angled away from her when she entered rooms. Her name softened into something easier for his family to say. Doors that closed a half-second before she reached them. She had understood, somewhere she did not visit often, that she was tolerated in this house rather than wanted. She had stayed because she believed the version of Dominic she had met first, careful, attentive, briefly kind, was the true version, and the other version was the temporary one. She had been wrong. The cruel version was not new. It was just patient. "You look tired," said the cousin beside her, not unkindly. Renee looked at him. "I'm fine," she said. He nodded and looked away, and she understood that no one at this table would ask again. Across the room, Dominic stood and raised his glass. The conversation stilled around him the way conversations do when a man of a certain confidence enters the center of them. "I want to say a few words," he said, "about the woman who makes every room better simply by walking into it." He looked at Camille. He held her gaze. He smiled the smile of a man who has never once considered that his behavior might be witnessed by someone keeping score. "My partner," he said, "in every way that matters." Several guests raised their glasses. A few murmured something warm. Camille's chin lifted just slightly, the way a woman does when she has been publicly claimed and wants to make sure the right person is watching. She found Renee across the table without appearing to look for her. Renee lifted her water glass. She drank, but he didn't know she had already read every word on that document, and she had already made one phone call. The dinner moved through its courses the way formal things do, slowly, decorated, performing a version of ease that no one in the room entirely felt. Midway through the second course, Camille set down her knife and turned toward the far end of the table with an expression arranged into something resembling concern. "Renee," she said, clear enough to carry, "when do you plan to stop embarrassing yourself by staying?" The table did not go silent all at once. It went quiet in a wave, moving outward from Camille's voice, the way a stone drops into water. Two of Dominic's cousins laughed, a small, uncomfortable sound, more reflex than cruelty. Dominic did not correct her. He lifted his own glass and looked at the ceiling, a man appreciating the architecture. Renee set down her fork. She looked at Camille with the particular steadiness of someone who has already decided how this ends. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she said. Camille smiled. "For now," she said, and turned back to her plate. Then a family friend, a man named Bernard, who had known Dominic since university, appeared beside Renee's chair during a moment when the servers were moving between courses. He bent slightly, conspiratorial, voice low. "He told us you'd agreed to the arrangement," Bernard said, "that you were fine with it. I just wanted you to know, in case it felt otherwise, that everyone understands." Renee turned to look at him. "What arrangement is that?" Bernard blinked. He straightened. He said the two of you had come to an understanding." "I see," Renee said. He moved away quickly, the way people do when they realize they have delivered a message they did not fully understand. That was the moment Renee understood the full architecture of what Dominic had built. Not just the public cruelty, the narrative around it. He had told people she consented. He had made her humiliation into something mutual, something agreed upon, so that every witness in this room believed there was nothing wrong with what they were watching. That was the cruelest thing he had done all evening. Not the pointing. Not Camille's question. The lie he had planted before she arrived, so that her pain had nowhere to land. She reached into her pocket. Her fingers found the brass button. She held it. Then Camille reached across the table. Not for anything she needed, for the extra bread roll on Renee's plate. She lifted it slowly with 2 fingers, the way you handle something that isn't worth hurrying over, and placed it on her own plate. She did not look at Renee when she did it. She resumed her conversation. Renee did not flinch. She sat back. She breathed. Everyone in that room would remember exactly where they were sitting when it happened, but not one of them understood yet what they were actually witnessing. Later, when the guests had moved into the sitting room for drinks and Dominic's laughter filled the hallway like something that had decided to take up space, Renee moved in the other direction. The library at the back of the house had one lamp, and she turned it on and sat at the small desk beside the window and unfolded the document. It was not a letter. It carried no personal message, no explanation, no instruction from Eugenia. It was a corporate ownership filing. Formal, dense, dated 11 years ago. She read it twice, then a third time, tracking the specific language the way her attorney father had once taught her to, slowly, without assumption, following each clause to its end before moving to the next. The Hargrove Group. The company Dominic had built his entire identity around. The company he spoke of at dinner parties the way other men spoke of their fathers. With reverence, with ownership, with the absolute certainty that it was his and had always been his. The filing listed one silent majority shareholder with controlling interest. One name. One signature dated 11 years ago. Eugenia Hargrove. Renee sat very still. Dominic did not own his company. He had never owned his company. Every deal he had closed, every board meeting he had chaired, every interview in which he had described himself as a self-made man, every word of it rested on a foundation that belonged, legally and completely, to his mother. And his mother had handed Renee the proof of this over a marble threshold this morning, without a single word of explanation. She reached into her pocket and placed the brass button on top of the document. She looked at both of them under the lamplight. Then she took out her phone. The attorney she called was not hers. She had found him 6 weeks ago through a referral from her father's oldest friend, and she had said nothing to Dominic about it, and she had paid the retainer in cash from her personal account, and she had met with him twice in the same week. She realized the appointment she made to see her obstetrician had been quietly canceled by someone who had access to her calendar. She left the library when the call connected. She walked to the far corner of the garden, where the party noise couldn't reach her. She spoke for 22 minutes. When she came back inside, the document was in her bag, and the brass button was in her pocket, and her face held the expression of a woman who has just confirmed something she had suspected, but needed to see in writing. What he said at dinner had changed everything in that room, but what she had just confirmed on that phone call changed everything else. The week that followed moved fast and quietly. Renee did not confront Dominic. She did not change her behavior, her schedule, or the temperature in the house. She made tea in the morning and answered his questions in full sentences and thanked the housekeeper by name the way she always had. And in the hours Dominic spent at the office, she moved. Her attorney's name was Warren Okafor, and he was the kind of man who kept his office cold and his files organized by color and his opinions to himself until he had evidence to support them. She sat across from him on a Tuesday afternoon and watched him read the ownership filing and then look up at her above his glasses. "Did you know about this before last week?" he said. "No," she said. "Did your husband know you had this?" "No." He set the filing flat on the desk. "Then we have a significant amount of work to do," he said, "and not much time to do it in." What Warren found in the first 48 hours confirmed what Renee had suspected when she saw the cancellation on her calendar. Dominic had begun the legal process of removing her from their jointly held assets 4 months ago, before she was showing, before anyone outside their household knew she was pregnant. The home she had decorated, the accounts she had managed, the trust established in both their names for the baby. All of it had been quietly redirected, documented, filed, and processed by hands she hadn't yet identified. The process was surgical, practiced. That was what Warren said when he called her on Wednesday evening. "This is practiced," he said. "This isn't the first time." It wasn't. A woman named Dara. A relationship that ended 7 years before Dominic met Renee. Warren found her in the filing history, a name attached to a settlement agreement, a waiver, a series of documents she had signed without independent legal counsel. She had been walked through the same process, the same architecture. She had signed away rights she didn't know she had, and by the time she understood what she had given up, the window had already closed. "Who drafted the documents?" Renee said. Warren turned his laptop toward her. The signature at the bottom of every filing, both Dara's and Renee's, belonged to the same attorney, a man named Prescott Hargrove, Dominic's first cousin, the man who had raised his glass at the family dinner and laughed at Camille's joke and leaned back in his chair with the ease of a man who has never once worried about consequences finding him. Renee looked at Prescott's signature for a long time. "He was at the dinner," she said. "He drafted every document," Warren said. She sat back. "What else?" Warren took off his glasses and set them on the desk. "The asset transfers Dominic initiated, the funds he used to finance the personal account movements. They came from Hargrove Group operating accounts. He didn't use his own money. He used company funds." He paused. "Company funds that, according to this ownership filing, legally belong to Eugenia Hargrove, without her authorization, without disclosure to the board." Renee placed her hand flat on the desk. "That's fraud," she said. "That's federal," Warren said. She had been waiting for something she could hold, something concrete, specific, and provable. She had it now. She had it in 4 layers, each one more devastating than the last. And somewhere inside the structure of all of it was the reason Eugenia had pressed that document into her hands without a word. Not out of sentiment, not out of guilt, out of precision. Eugenia had known exactly what she was handing over. She had chosen the moment. She had chosen the recipient. And she had said nothing because she didn't need to. The document said everything. Eugenia called on a Thursday evening. Renee was in the kitchen, and the call came through on the number Warren had given her. A new number, registered to a contact Dominic had never seen. "There is an event," Eugenia said. 3 weeks from Saturday, the Hargrove Group Annual Shareholder Gala." A pause. "Be there." "I'll be there," Renee said. "Good," Eugenia said, and the line went quiet. 3 weeks. Renee sat with that. 21 days during which she continued to make tea and answer questions in full sentences and sleep on her side of the bed in the house that legally might not be hers by spring. 21 days during which Dominic grew visibly lighter, the way men do when they believe a problem is resolving itself. He started going to the office earlier. He came home later. Once, he hummed while he was making coffee, and the sound of it landed in the room like something obscene. The gala was held at the Caldwell Grand Hotel, a ballroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and a guest list of 200 that included board members, senior investors, press, and every member of the Hargrove family with a reason to attend. Dominic arrived 90 minutes early. He wore a new suit. He had new business cards in his breast pocket, printed with a title he had not yet officially been granted, but had privately decided was inevitable. Chief Executive and Sole Principal, Hargrove Group. He ordered a drink from a server who had worked this event for a decade. He did not say, "Thank you." He never did. Camille arrived on his arm in a gown the color of champagne, chosen, she had told him, because she wanted to celebrate properly. She moved through the room with the specific confidence of a woman who has been told repeatedly that she is winning. She introduced herself to 3 board members as Dominic's partner. She described Renee to 2 different guests as someone who had moved on gracefully. The word gracefully doing the particular work of making Renee's absence seem like her own idea. Dominic found his mother at the head of the board table and kissed her cheek. "You look wonderful," he said. "Thank you," Eugenia said. She had a glass of water in front of her that she had not touched. "Big night," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." He moved back toward the center of the room, satisfied. His mother had always been supportive in her quiet way. That was how he thought of her, quietly supportive, a background presence, the kind of woman who attended events and smiled and let the real work happen around her. He had never once, in 41 years, considered the possibility that she was the most dangerous person in any room she entered. Renee arrived 12 minutes before the program was scheduled to begin. She came through a side door. She wore deep burgundy, a structured dress, clean lines, nothing decorative. No earrings, no necklace. At her lapel, a small brass pin in the shape of a button, polished and precise. She carried a slim leather folder under one arm. She moved to the family table and sat down. She placed the folder in front of her and folded her hands on top of it. She looked at the stage. Dominic saw her from across the room. His smile didn't fall immediately. It froze, a specific freeze, the kind that happens when a man's nervous system registers something his confidence hasn't caught up to yet. He looked at Camille. She hadn't seen Renee yet. He looked back at the table. Renee was looking at the stage. He decided it didn't matter. Whatever she thought she was doing, it was too late. The machine was already in motion. The documents were filed. The accounts were moved. The speech was written. He reached into his breast pocket and touched the edge of his new business cards. He exhaled. What he said at dinner had been the beginning of the end for Renee. That was what he believed, standing in that ballroom, touching his business cards. He had no idea the end had already been written by someone else in a document dated 11 years ago, and that document was currently sitting in the leather folder on the table 20 feet away from him. Eugenia stood when the program began. The room settled quickly. She had that quality, a gravity that needed no announcement. She thanked the shareholders for their loyalty. She thanked the board for their continued trust. She was warm, specific, unhurried. And then she said, without a shift in tone, that before the formal program proceeded, there was a matter of corporate record she wished to formally acknowledge in the presence of the full board. She introduced a man named Aldrich Mensa, the company's newly appointed independent legal counsel. Not Prescott, a man no one at the Hargrove table had ever seen before tonight. Prescott, seated 2 chairs from Dominic, straightened almost imperceptibly. Aldrich Mensa stood and read from the ownership filing. Every line, the name, the date, the percentage, the controlling interest. He did not rush. He did not editorialize. He simply read, in a clear voice, the facts as they had always legally existed, in a room full of people who were hearing them for the first time. Dominic's expression moved in stages. First, the confusion of a man hearing words in an order that doesn't match his internal map. Then, a kind of recalibration, a visible attempt to locate himself in what was being said and find the version where he was still standing, where he thought he was standing. And then the specific, hollow recognition of a man who has just understood that the ground he built everything on belongs to someone else and has always belonged to someone else, and that the person it belongs to is currently standing 6 feet away from him, hands clasped, watching him understand. Renee opened the leather folder. She passed the USB drive to the AV coordinator, who had been briefed, who moved without hesitation, who connected it to the system before Dominic had finished processing what Aldrich Mensa had just read aloud. The recording began without introduction. Dominic's voice, clear and specific, the way he always spoke on the phone, direct, unguarded, certain no one was writing anything down. He was speaking to Prescott. He named the accounts. He named the amounts. He described the transfers with the bored precision of a man giving instructions he had given before. He used the company accounts. He named them the Hargrove Group accounts, which legally belonged to his mother, without her authorization, without any authorization. The recording played for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. 200 people heard every word. The silence before the room reacted lasted 4 full seconds. Renee counted them. She had expected noise, voices rising, chairs moving, someone asking a question. Instead, there were 4 seconds of absolute quiet in a ballroom with 200 people in it, a silence so complete it had its own weight, its own temperature. She sat with her hands folded. She did not look at Dominic. She looked at the board members. She watched their faces do the work that faces do when evidence is undeniable. Then Prescott stood. He said Dominic's name once, as though that were a plan. Dominic did not respond. He was looking at his mother. Eugenia was looking back at him with an expression that held no anger, no satisfaction, no grief. Just clarity. The expression of a woman who has made a decision she has been building toward for a long time and has finally, precisely, delivered it. Camille stood to leave. She had identified the nearest exit and was moving toward it when a board member named Henrietta Osei stepped into the aisle, not blocking it physically, but turning toward Camille with a question delivered in a voice the whole room could hear. "Ms. Camille," she said, "given your role in advising Mr. Hargrove on these business decisions, could you speak to the board about your involvement?" It was not a legal question. It was a social one. But it landed like a wall. Camille sat back down. She had been introduced to 3 board members as Dominic's partner tonight. She had said it herself. Partnership, it turned out, runs both directions. Dominic did not make his speech. His new business cards stayed in his pocket. The evening moved forward without him at the center of it, which was the most devastating thing that could have happened to a man who had organized his entire sense of self around being the center of things. Renee closed the leather folder. She did not stand. She did not make a statement. She simply sat, composed, in a room that had just shifted entirely and waited for the moment to complete itself. What she said next? Nothing. She had already said everything. Months ago, in a library, under one lamp, alone, when she picked up a phone and started making calls. The consequences arrived in the order Warren had predicted, on the timeline he had sketched on a yellow legal pad she still had in her bag. Dominic was removed from the Hargrove Group board within 72 hours. The shareholder vote required was not close. Eugenia cast the deciding vote without ceremony. She did not look at him when she did it. She did not speak to him in the room. She signed the document that her new legal counsel placed in front of her and handed it back without pause, the way you return something you have been holding for longer than you should have. Prescott's license was referred to the state bar for review before the end of the week. He resigned from the family firm on a Friday afternoon in a letter that used the word personal 4 times and explained nothing. His nameplate was removed from the office door over the weekend. No one photographed it. It simply disappeared, the way things do when no one wants to be seen acknowledging they existed. The fraud filing reached federal regulators by the following Monday. Dominic's personal accounts were frozen pending investigation. The new business cards, still in the original box, unopened except for the one he had put in his pocket, sat in the back seat of his car for 3 weeks before he thought to remove them. He did not know what to do with them. He had not yet found a category for the life he was now inside. Camille did not receive a formal removal from anything. There was no announcement, no confrontation, no scene. She simply stopped being invited. 3 social circles she had spent 2 years carefully building went quiet around her simultaneously, the way interconnected things do when the center no longer holds. A piece of jewelry she had worn publicly, purchased, it turned out, on a Hargrove Group corporate card, was returned in an envelope through a mutual contact. She did not include a note. Neither did the sender. She left the gala alone that night in the champagne gown, through the side exit Henrietta Osei had briefly blocked. A valet brought her car. She tipped him and got in and sat for a moment in the parked car outside the Caldwell Grand Hotel with the engine running and her hands in her lap. Then she drove away. That was the last time she was in a room with people who recognized her name and said it warmly. In the hotel lobby, in the hour after the gala ended, Renee stood near the concierge desk waiting for the car Warren had arranged. The lobby was emptying. A woman approached from the direction of the ballroom. Someone Renee did not immediately recognize. Someone who moved with the specific hesitance of a person who has rehearsed what they want to say and is now uncertain they should say it. She stopped in front of Renee and reached into her bag. She took out a folded note and held it out without speaking. Renee took it. The woman nodded once, and then she walked quickly toward the exit and was gone before Renee could ask her name. Renee looked at the note. She unfolded it carefully. 2 words, written in handwriting she didn't recognize. She read them, then folded the paper again and put it in her bag. Beside the leather folder, beside the brass button in its small interior pocket, she did not say anything. Her car arrived. She walked outside. 3 months later, the light in the bedroom of the new house came through thin curtains at a specific angle that turned the floor gold in the morning. It was not the estate. It was not the house she had decorated and managed and quietly maintained for 4 years. It was a small house in a neighborhood where the mornings were loud. Children, someone cooking, a radio playing something old and brass-heavy that came through the walls the way warmth does. Renee sat in the chair by the window. The baby was asleep in the next room. On the small table beside her, a cup of tea, a legal document confirming the terms of her settlement, and a thin chain with a small brass button threaded onto it, resting against her collarbone. She turned the button. Once between her fingers, the reflex of someone who has held a thing long enough that her hands knew it before her mind did. Eugenia came on Thursdays. She did not come with advice or apology, or the particular weight of someone who needs their role in the story acknowledged. She came and sat across from Renee in the chair beside the window, and they drank tea and talked about the baby's sleep and the neighborhood, and once, briefly, about a garden Eugenia had kept when Dominic was small, before things became what they became. She did not mention her son by name. Neither did Renee. This Thursday, Eugenia brought something wrapped in cloth, a small wooden toy, handmade, with the baby's name carved into it in letters that were slightly uneven, the way handmade things are. She set it on the table without ceremony or explanation. Renee picked it up and turned it over. She ran her thumb across the letters. "She's going to love it," Renee said. Eugenia looked out the window. "She deserves things made for her," she said, specifically. Renee set the toy down beside the tea and beside the settlement document and beside the chain with the brass button. 4 objects on a small table, each one a different chapter of the same year. She picked up the button on its chain and held it for a moment, then let it rest back against her collarbone. From the next room, a small sound, not a cry, just a stirring, the specific sound of someone waking up and deciding the world is worth engaging. Renee stood. She moved toward the sound. At the doorway, she paused. The baby's hand was visible above the edge of the crib, small fingers, curled at rest. Already, at this size, holding the air around them the way hands do when they are new to the world and have not yet learned to let go of things. Renee stood in the doorway and looked at that hand. Outside, the neighborhood kept its noise. Children, the radio, the smell of something being cooked in oil the way her grandmother used to cook, low heat, patient. The morning held all of it. The morning had room for all of it. She crossed the room and reached into the crib. The baby's fingers curled around hers. Small, certain, the grip of something that does not know yet what it means to doubt. She stood there. She let herself be held. If Renee's stillness reminded you that quiet people carry the heaviest truths, like this video, share it with someone who has ever been made to kneel in a room full of people who said nothing, and subscribe.